The first thing they did was walk up to the front gate. Not through a fence, not through a compromised access point, through the visitor entrance of a United States Navy installation, the same entrance that contractors, family members, and authorized guests use every day. They signed in, they moved through the standard access protocol, and they collected from the public and semi-public spaces of a Navy recruiting and support facility the kind of information that Chinese military intelligence had specifically tasked them to obtain. Names, contact information, service records, the personal details of Navy recruits and personnel that the Ministry of State Security, China's primary civilian intelligence organization, had identified as the foundation of a long-term recruitment pipeline targeting American military personnel. Yuanse, Cheng, and Lizhen were not sophisticated intelligence officers with decades of tradecraft. They were people the MSS had deployed on a specific operational mission inside the United States. They visited Navy installations in multiple locations. They ran cash dead drops across multiple American cities. They collected personal data on Navy recruits, and they operated inside the United States, on American soil, at American military facilities, while being directed by and reporting to Chinese government intelligence handlers. They were arrested by the FBI, Cheng in Oregon, Lizhen in Houston. On July 22, 2025, both were charged with acting as agents of the People's Republic of China without registration, in violation of federal law. The indictment described a scheme that combined the most direct form of Chinese intelligence collection, physical access to American military facilities, with the financial infrastructure of cash-based payments that characterizes the MSS's operational tradecraft. This is the story of what happens when Chinese intelligence sends human operatives to the front gate of an American Navy base, instead of relying on the cyber intrusions and remote recruitment that dominate the public narrative about Chinese espionage, and of why the FBI's arrest of Cheng and Lai represents something specific about the scope of the MSS's collection efforts against the American military. Let's go back to the beginning of the operation. The Ministry of State Security, China's intelligence and security agency, has been documented across multiple federal prosecutions as maintaining an aggressive program for recruiting sources inside American military institutions. The program's documented approach involves multiple vectors simultaneously: social media outreach, freelance platform recruitment, as in the Schultz case, direct personal approach, and what the FBI describes as spotting and assessing, the systematic identification of potential recruits through the collection of personal data about service members and recruits. Spotting and assessing requires information. Specifically, it requires the kind of information that appears in personnel records, in Navy recruiting materials, in the administrative data that surrounds the intake of new service members into the military. Names, contact details, service branch, location, specialty, and any personal information that can help an intelligence handler identify vulnerabilities, financial pressure, family issues, ideological disposition, that might make a specific individual receptive to a recruitment approach. Cheng and Lai were sent to collect that information. Their specific method, visiting Navy bases and recruiting centers, accessing the materials and data available in visitor-accessible spaces, represents the direct collection approach that is simultaneously more operationally risky and potentially more productive than remote digital collection. Physical presence at a facility allows the collection of information that never appears in any digital system the MSS could access remotely. What's your read? When Chinese intelligence sends human operatives to physically walk into American Navy installations to collect recruit data, does this represent a more aggressive posture than the remote digital recruitment approach seen in other cases? Type A, if the physical presence represents meaningful escalation. Type B, if this is simply a parallel track in an ongoing collection operation. Drop it in the comments. The cash dead drops were the operational security mechanism. In intelligence parlance, a dead drop is a method of passing information or materials between an intelligence handler and an asset without direct contact, reducing the risk that surveillance of either party will identify the relationship. Cheng and Lai used cash dead drops across multiple American cities to receive their operational payments from the MSS's infrastructure, keeping the financial transactions outside the digital banking system that federal financial investigators monitor. Cash, specific locations, known to both parties through prearranged communication. The methodology of the 20th Century Intelligence Tradecraft Playbook, deployed by a 21st Century Intelligence Service because the fundamentals still work. The FBI's documentation of the dead drop locations and transactions, the specific cities, the specific transfer amounts, the specific timing, is part of the federal case record. The mechanism of how the Bureau identified the dead drops is not disclosed in available public filings. Counterintelligence surveillance, digital forensics, informant information, or some combination of all three are the standard investigative tools for this category of case. What the Bureau found was specific enough to support arrests in two different cities, Cheng in Oregon and Lai in Houston, on the same federal charges. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because the Navy facility access documentation and what the FBI recovered about the specific information Cheng and Lai collected reveals how the MSS's spotting and assessment program operates at the ground level. The charges against both Cheng and Lai, acting as agents of a foreign government without the required notification to the U.S. Attorney General under 18 U.S.C. Parv 951, the statute that makes it a federal crime to operate within the United States on behalf of a foreign government without disclosure. Section 951 is broader than the espionage statutes. It applies to any agent acting at the direction of a foreign government inside the United States, regardless of whether the conduct reaches the threshold of espionage or the transfer of national defense information. The specific conduct, visiting Navy installations, collecting personnel data, running cash dead drops, reporting to MSS handlers, falls squarely within the statute's coverage. Neither defendant needed to steal classified information to face federal charges. The act of operating as an undisclosed foreign government agent inside the United States was the crime. The Navy installations they visited, the specific bases and recruiting centers, are not fully identified in available public filings. The available record identifies the activity type, military installations, and recruiting facilities. The specific geographic locations of the Navy sites visited, beyond the Oregon and Houston areas where arrests occurred, are not confirmed in public records. You've seen the full operation, physical visits to Navy bases, recruit data collection, cash dead drops across multiple cities, MSS direction and reporting. What would you have done as the Navy security officer who first noticed Cheng and Lai accessing visitor-accessible spaces at a recruiting facility? Comment your call below. The federal indictment was returned on July 22, 2025. Both defendants appeared in federal court. Their cases proceeded through the federal system in the Eastern District of Texas and the District of Oregon, respectively, the districts where they were arrested. The disposition of their cases, whether they proceeded to trial, pleaded guilty, or remain in litigation, is not confirmed in the most recent available public filings as of this writing. The indictment is public. The charges are clear. The investigation that produced them is documented. The broader MSS operation that Cheng and Lai were part of is not something a two-person arrest resolves. The spotting and assessment program, the systematic collection of Navy recruit data as the foundation of a long-term recruitment pipeline, operates through multiple channels simultaneously. Cheng and Lai were two operatives in one approach vector: the digital approach vectors, the social media outreach, the freelance platform recruitment. All of them continue operating regardless of what happens in the courtrooms where these two defendants are awaiting their outcomes. These investigations, FBI Portland and FBI Houston field offices, coordinating with Naval Criminal Investigative Service, the DOJ National Security Division, and the National Counterintelligence and Security Center, represent the sustained effort to identify and prosecute foreign intelligence operatives who conduct in-person collection operations against American military targets. If this level of detail is what you come here for, A thumbs up is the best way to support this work. The MSS's approach to the American military targets, it has publicly been documented as pursuing HIMARS data, Navy recruit information, Army analyst communications, Delta Force TTPs, reflects a comprehensive collection strategy that addresses American military capabilities at multiple levels simultaneously. The technical level, weapons system specifications and operational parameters. The personnel level, identifying individuals who might be susceptible to recruitment. The institutional level, the operational methodologies and tactical doctrine that govern how the American military actually fights. Cheng and Lai were operating at the personnel level. Their mission was to build the foundation for future recruitment. The names and contact details of Navy recruits who could be approached individually once the MSS had identified which among them might be vulnerable. That approach requires patience. It requires the collection of data now for exploitation later. And it requires operatives willing to walk up to the front gate of an American Navy installation, sign in at the visitor desk, and collect what they came to collect. Was this the FBI doing exactly what it exists to do? Identifying and arresting foreign intelligence operatives physically operating against American military facilities? Or does the arrest of 2 collection operatives, while the MSS's broader program continues, represent a visible accountability for an invisible iceberg? Drop your verdict in the comments. One detail, the one that makes this case specific to the moment it happened. The front gate, the visitor entrance, the standard access protocol that American military facilities maintain for the people who come to them legitimately every day. A Navy recruiting center has a visitor area because it is designed to attract recruits. It has materials available in its public spaces because those materials are how it markets the Navy to potential enlistees. It has a sign-in process because security requires documentation of who is present. All of those features, the accessibility, the materials, the documentation, are features of a military institution designed to interface with the civilian world. They are also features that the MSS's collection methodology specifically exploited. Cheng and Lai walked in through the front. They signed in. They collected what they came for, and they walked out. The FBI built a case on that visit and on the cash dead drops that preceded and followed it. The indictment was returned. The arrests were made. But the next 2 people the MSS sends to the next Navy recruiting center will also sign in through the front gate. The counterintelligence surveillance that caught Cheng and Lai will either be there or it won't. The visitor log that documented their presence is the same visitor log that documents everyone else's. What's the detail about this case that stays with you? The front gate access? The most direct collection method the MSS used? The cash dead drops across multiple American cities? The recruit data collected as the foundation for future recruitment targeting? Or the 2-person arrest that represents a visible piece of an invisible program? Let's discuss it below. And if there's a federal case you want us to investigate next, leave it below. The notification bell is the only way to make sure you're there when it drops. One more number, the one that makes the operational logic of the MSS's collection program explicit. The MSS's documented approach to building recruitment networks inside the American military, the spotting and assessment program that Cheng and Lai were supporting, is built on probability. Of 1,000 Navy recruits whose personal data is collected, perhaps 100 will have personal or financial circumstances that make them theoretically recruitable. Of those 100, perhaps 10 will be approachable through the specific contact method the handler selects. Of those 10, perhaps 1 or 2 will actually accept an initial approach and enter a relationship with Chinese intelligence. That probability math requires a large initial data set. The more recruits whose personal information the MSS collects, the larger the pool from which its handlers can identify the specific individuals most likely to become sources. Cheng and Lai were building that data set. Their visits to Navy installations were not producing intelligence directly. They were producing the foundation for future intelligence, the raw material from which a patient intelligence service builds its next-generation access to the American military. The FBI's arrest disrupted 2 collection operatives. It did not disrupt the data set already collected or the analytical process that the MSS applies to it. The recruit names and contact details that Cheng and Lai gathered before their arrest are in an MSS database. The analysts who received their reports are still working. The handlers who will approach the specific individuals identified through the spotting and assessment process are still operational. 2 arrests, 1 visible disruption, a program that continues. That is the counterintelligence reality that the FBI's case documents without fully resolving. The accountability is real, the disruption is real, the limitation is also real. The notification bell is the only way to make sure you're there when the next case drops. Subscribe now.